You're helping your heartbroken mother pack up the belongings of the man who just shattered her world. You're throwing his clothes into garbage bags, tossing his personal items into boxes, when suddenly there's a knock at the door. You open it to find his coworker, someone you went to high school with, and she says the words that will change everything. I have something important to tell your mom about Chris. What she revealed that day didn't just break my mother's heart all over again. It lit a fire of rage in me and my siblings that would burn for months. And by the time we were done, this cheating, lying, manipulative man would lose absolutely everything. If you've ever felt that burning desire for justice when someone you trusted betrayed your family, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about karma coming full circle. Because what you're about to hear is one of the most methodical, satisfying takedowns of a cheating scumbag you'll ever witness. Let me paint you the picture of where this all began. I'm 24, and I just moved back in with my mom after she went through the most devastating period of her life. Her marriage of 25 years, my entire childhood, had just imploded. My biological father turned out to be a manipulative nightmare, and after decades of emotional abuse, my mom finally found the strength to leave. But here's the thing about people who've been broken down for so long. They're vulnerable. They're desperate for someone to make them feel worthy again. And predators can smell that desperation from miles away. Enter Chris. 45 years old, charming when he wanted to be, and carrying more red flags than a Soviet parade. My mom met him through her work as a correctional officer at the county jail. Yeah, you heard that right. Chris was a former inmate. He'd been locked up for a DUI, which should have been warning sign number 1. But my mom was grieving, trying to rebuild her life, and Chris seemed to make her smile again. I bit my tongue. My brother, who's 23, bit his tongue. My sister, who's 30 and usually doesn't hold back, even she bit her tongue. Because after watching our mom suffer for so many years, seeing her happy, even if it was with someone questionable, felt like a gift. We all moved in together, me, my brother, my sister, mom, and Chris. And for a while it actually worked. Chris and I bonded over video games. He seemed to genuinely care about my mom. He had a steady job as a store manager at Dairy Queen, and he was trying to build a life with us. But you know what they say about people who seem too good to be true? 2017. That's when our carefully constructed new family started crumbling. Chris had been going to regular probationary checkups at the courthouse, standard procedure for his DUI conviction. One Tuesday morning, he left for his appointment like always. But he never came home. Hours passed. We started getting worried. Had he been in an accident? Was he okay? Then the phone rang, and my mom's face went white as she answered. Hello, Chris? Where are you? The voice on the other end was shaky, scared. I'm in Texas. Texas? We lived nowhere near Texas. Turns out, when Chris walked into that courthouse, he didn't walk into a routine checkup. He walked into an FBI sting operation. His family back in Texas, the family he'd never really talked about, were deep into gang and drug-related crimes. And Chris? He'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time during a drug handoff years earlier, making him complicit in federal crimes. The FBI gave him a choice: testify against his own family members or go down with them. Chris chose to save his own skin. He agreed to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence and the ability to remain free until the trial. My mom was devastated. The man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd brought into our home, had been living a lie. But love makes you do crazy things, and over the course of a year filled with tearful phone calls and prison visits, they planned their future together. His boss at Dairy Queen even agreed to hold his store manager position for him. When Chris finally came home, we thought maybe we could get back to normal. We were so wrong. The Chris who came back from Texas wasn't the same man who'd left. The stress of betraying his family, the looming trial, the weight of his secrets, it all came pouring out through a bottle. Now, Chris had always been a drinker. You don't get a DUI by being a teetotaler. But this was different. This was systematic self-destruction. Half a 24-pack of beer. Every single day. And drunk Chris? Drunk Chris was a monster. He'd come home from work already 3 sheets to the wind, stumbling through the door with that glazed look in his eyes. The smallest thing would set him off, dinner being 5 minutes late, the TV being too loud, one of us kids leaving a dish in the sink. He'd explode into these verbal tirades that would go on for hours. I remember one night, he screamed at my mom for 20 minutes because she'd moved his beer from the fridge to make room for groceries. 20 minutes of calling her stupid, worthless, ungrateful. My mom just stood there and took it, making excuses about how the stress was getting to him. My siblings and I would exchange looks across the dinner table, all thinking the same thing. This isn't sustainable. This can't last. But my mom had already been through one devastating breakup. She wasn't ready to admit she'd made another mistake. For 3 years, we watched this cycle repeat. Chris would drink, Chris would rage, my mom would enable, and we'd all pretend everything was fine the next morning. But you can only pretend for so long. The night everything changed started like so many others. Chris stumbled through the front door, reeking of alcohol and looking for a fight. But this time, my mom didn't back down. "Have you been drinking?" she asked, her voice steady but tired. Chris didn't even try to lie. He just shrugged, like it was no big deal that he'd driven home drunk again, like it was no big deal that he was slowly destroying our family. That shrug was the final straw. "Get out," my mom said quietly. "What? Get out?" The force in her voice surprised all of us. "I'm done, Chris. I'm done with the drinking, I'm done with the fighting, I'm done with all of it. Get out of my house." Chris tried to argue, tried to manipulate, tried all his usual tactics. But my mom had found her backbone again. She kicked him out that night, and he went to stay with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather some of his essential items so he wouldn't have to come back into the house until he got sober. We were in his room, packing his clothes, when we heard a knock at the front door. I opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's co-workers from Dairy Queen. I recognized her immediately. We'd gone to high school together. But the look on her face told me this wasn't a social visit. "I need to talk to your mom," she said, her voice shaking. "I have something important to tell her about Chris." Betty sat my mom down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she spoke. "Promise me you won't tell Chris where you got this information," she said. "He'll fire me if he finds out I told you." My mom nodded, but I could see the dread building in her eyes. "Chris has been cheating on you," Betty said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "With a woman named Darla. She's about 40, and they've been doing things at work. Sexual things. In the store, in the office, in the parking lot. I've caught them multiple times." My mom's face went ashen, but Betty wasn't done. "When I confronted Chris about it, he threatened to fire me if I ever told you. He said it was none of my business, and that I should keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my job." The room was dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "There's more," Betty whispered. "Darla is pregnant, and Chris told her he's excited because he'll finally have a child of his own." That last part hit my mom like a physical blow. Chris had always known she couldn't have more children. The 3 of us had been difficult pregnancies that nearly killed her. For him to say he wanted a child of his own, as if we weren't enough, as if we weren't real family. The grief on my mom's face transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure, cold rage. "Get everything," my mom said, her voice deadly calm. "Every single thing that belongs to him. I want it all out of this house in the next hour." We moved like a military unit. Clothes, toiletries, video games, books, tools. Everything Chris owned got thrown into garbage bags and boxes. We carried it all out to the alley behind our house and dumped it in a pile. While we worked, my mom called Chris. "I know about Darla," she said when he answered. No hello, no preamble. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like forever. "I can explain," he started. "No," my mom cut him off. "You can confess. All of it. Right now." And he did. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was relief at finally being caught, but Chris spilled everything. The affair, the pregnancy, his excitement about having his own child. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He actually seemed happy that it was all out in the open. "Your stuff is in the alley," my mom told him. "You can pick it up with a police escort. Don't ever contact me again." She hung up and looked at us, her 3 kids who'd watched her endure years of abuse from our father, then years of manipulation from Chris. "I'm done being a victim," she said. "But my siblings and I, we were just getting started." My mom wanted to move on, to heal, to put Chris behind her. But my brother, my sister, and I had other plans. This man had taken advantage of our mother when she was vulnerable. He'd brought chaos into our home, threatened our family's stability, and then had the audacity to cheat on her while talking about having real children. We weren't going to let that slide. We started with his workplace. Dairy Queen operates as independently owned franchises, and the owner of Chris's branch was actually a family friend who owned several locations in the area. We called him and explained the situation, how Chris had been using his position as store manager to coerce sexual favors from his mistress on company property. The owner was horrified. Not only was this a massive liability issue, but it was happening in a family restaurant where children came to eat ice cream. Chris was fired immediately and banned from all locations in the area. Betty, the co-worker who'd had the courage to tell my mom the truth, got promoted to store manager. She cleaned house, implemented new policies, and turned that location into one of the most successful in the franchise. Chris and his pregnant mistress Darla moved to a town about an hour away, where he managed to get hired at another Dairy Queen. We found out through mutual acquaintances and made some phone calls. This time it took longer. There was no current inappropriate behavior happening at the new location, so the owner had to be more careful about the firing process. But eventually, Chris's reputation caught up with him, and he lost that job too. With no job and no prospects, Chris started driving around our neighborhood. We'd see Darla's car parked across the street from our house, or slowly cruising past at all hours of the day and night. It was clear he was stalking my mom, probably blaming us for his job losses. But here's the thing Chris forgot. He still didn't have a valid driver's license. His DUI conviction had never been fully resolved because of the whole Texas situation, and his probation was still active. We called the police and explained the situation. There's a man stalking our family, we told them. He's driving a specific vehicle, but he doesn't have a license. If you see this car in our neighborhood, you should pull it over. It took a few weeks, but eventually our patience paid off. Chris was pulled over while driving Darla's car, drunk and without a license. He was arrested on the spot and taken back to the county jail where my mom used to work. But the story gets better. When the police searched the house where Chris was staying with Darla, they found several firearms on the property. Since Chris was a convicted felon, he wasn't legally allowed to possess weapons. More charges, more jail time. By the time he finished serving his sentence for the driving and weapons violations, it was time for him to be transported back to Texas for the trial he'd been avoiding. Chris's son was born while he was in prison. Darla, finally seeing Chris for what he really was, a manipulative, selfish man who destroyed everything he touched, cut all ties with him. She wanted nothing to do with him or his drama. From prison, Chris started sending letters to my mom. Dozens of them. Some were apologies, some were pleas to take him back, some were rants about how nothing was his fault. The cognitive dissonance was stunning. He'd apologize for cheating in one paragraph, then blame my mom for driving him to it in the next. My mom burned every single letter without reading them completely. We moved out of state, started fresh, left all that toxicity behind. My mom met someone new, a man who treats her with respect, who values her, who sees her 3 children as a blessing rather than a burden. Chris eventually got out of prison and moved to Kansas, where he's struggling to make ends meet and fighting child support payments that Darla successfully sued him for. His son will grow up knowing his father as the man who abandoned him, not the hero Chris probably imagined himself to be. My mom is thriving. She owns her own home now, which we've been renovating together. She's happy, healthy, and surrounded by people who actually love her. My brother and sister have moved on with their lives, but we all stay close. We learned something important through this whole experience. Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart, who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. Looking back, I don't feel guilty about what we did to Chris. He made his choices to cheat, to lie, to manipulate, to take advantage of a woman who was trying to rebuild her life after decades of abuse. We just made sure there were consequences for those choices. Sometimes people think revenge is about anger, but for us, it was about justice. It was about showing a predator that he couldn't destroy our family without facing the consequences. It was about protecting other women from going through what our mom went through. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Have you ever had to stand up for a family member who couldn't stand up for themselves? And of course, subscribe for more stories about karma, justice, and people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.